My name is Lila Moreno. I am 26 years old, and the night my parents finally broke me wasn't the night they screamed or threatened. It was the night they smiled. That smile still haunts me. I had spent months preparing for the graduate program interview. Late nights buried in research, endless mock questions, and a binder filled with outlines of my project proposal. I wanted this program because it was mine, not theirs. Not something chosen for me, polished to impress the neighbors, or curated to uphold the Moreno family's reputation. It was the first thing that felt like my life. The night before the interview, I came home to find them waiting at the dining table. My father's suit jacket was still on, my mother's pearls gleaming under the chandelier. Their wine glasses were half full, but the atmosphere was heavy with something I couldn't name. "Sit down, Lila," my father said. His tone wasn't sharp, but commanding enough to leave no room for choice. My pulse quickened. My mother's hand rested gently on mine, too gently. "We've decided to do something for you. Something that will guarantee your future." My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" She smiled, the kind of smile she wore at galas, when she wanted the world to think we were the perfect family. "We made a few calls. You won't need to go through that little interview tomorrow. The program director is a family friend. He's already agreed to slot you in." My mouth went dry. My father leaned forward, his voice carrying the finality of a gavel. "It's done. No need to stress. We've taken care of it." Froze. My binder, the weeks of preparation, the late nights. It all flashed in my mind and then shattered into dust. "You what?" My voice cracked. My father's eyes hardened. "This is how the world works, Lila. Connections. Reputation. We are saving you from failure." I pulled my hand from my mother's. "But I wanted to earn it. I wanted them to see me, not just your name." Her smile faltered. "You sound ungrateful. Do you know how many people would kill for an opportunity like this? Do you know how proud it makes us to say our daughter was chosen?" The word proud hit me like a blade. Their pride, always their pride. Not my happiness, not my dreams. Pride. I swallowed hard, my throat burning. "So, it's never about me. It's about how I make you look." My father's jaw tightened. "Watch your tone." "No," I whispered, my voice trembling but steadying with each word. "You didn't do this for me. You did this for yourselves. You've always done it for yourselves." The air turned electric. My mother's hand twitched, as if she wanted to reach for me again, but she didn't. My father's glare burned into me, and for the first time I didn't look away. In that moment something inside me cracked. Not a small crack, not a fracture that could be patched. A deep, irreparable split. I got up from the table. My legs shook, but I didn't sit back down. "I'll go to the interview tomorrow," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'll do it my way. And if I fail, at least it will be my failure, not your puppet show." My father's chair scraped loudly against the floor as he stood. His voice was cold, stripped of any pretense of gentleness. "If you walk into that room tomorrow without our name behind you, you are on your own. No more protection. No more support. Don't expect us to clean up the mess." My mother's eyes darted between us, panic flashing in her perfect smile, but she didn't stop him. She never did. I turned, walked up the stairs and closed my bedroom door. My body trembled as the truth settled in. They had never wanted me free. They had only wanted me obedient. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I could keep pretending. The next morning I would have to choose. Bend beneath the weight of their pride or finally break away. Either way, nothing would ever be the same. Hang on, before I tell you what happened next, make sure you've subscribed and left your thoughts in the comments. This part gets intense. I didn't wake up one day and suddenly realize my parents controlled me. The truth had been there all along, tucked inside 1,000 little moments that seemed harmless at first, until they weren't. When I was younger, I thought it was love. My earliest memories are of my mother brushing my hair so hard it burned my scalp. She would tilt my chin toward the mirror, smile, and say, "Perfection takes discipline, Lila. Remember that." If a strand fell out of place, she fixed it, even if it meant we were late for school. At the time, I thought that's what mothers did. Make sure you looked flawless before stepping outside. I didn't know it was the beginning of something deeper, something suffocating. My father wasn't much different. His love came with conditions. In middle school, I wanted to join the art club. I loved painting. How the brush felt in my hand, how colors came alive on canvas. But when I asked, he barely looked up from his newspaper. "Art won't get you anywhere," he said. "You need debate. You need activities that matter." So I joined debate. I learned to craft arguments, memorize statistics, and stand tall in front of a crowd. Everyone applauded me. Teachers, classmates, even judges at competitions. My father clapped the loudest. But I hated it. Every trophy I brought home felt like another link in a chain. In high school, the cracks started to show. I remember one night vividly. It was prom season, and I had been asked by a boy I actually liked. He wasn't wealthy, his family didn't belong to the country club, and he didn't wear the right kind of suit. But he made me laugh and he made me feel seen. When I told my parents, they exchanged a look. My mother's voice was honey-sweet but firm. "Lila, darling, think carefully. Is that really who you want to be seen with? This is your reputation. People will remember." I wore the dress they chose, went with the boy they approved of, and smiled through pictures that didn't feel like mine. The boy I liked stopped talking to me after that. By college, I had perfected the art of being their daughter. I dressed the way they wanted, dated the people they suggested, studied the subjects they chose. I learned to plaster on a smile that made everyone believe we were the golden family. But inside I was crumbling. It wasn't until my final year that the fight began to brew. I had taken an elective in creative writing, secretly, without telling them. The professor pulled me aside after my first assignment and said, "You have a voice worth hearing. Don't let anyone silence it." His words lodged in my chest like a spark refusing to die. When I told my parents, their reaction was immediate. My father's face darkened. "Writing. That's a hobby, not a career. We didn't raise you for mediocrity." My mother added softly, "You'll embarrass yourself, sweetheart. People will think you've wasted your education." I wanted to scream. To tell them that my words mattered more to me than their precious reputation. But instead I stayed quiet. Because staying quiet had been my survival. Till now. That night at the dining table, when they confessed they had secured my graduate spot through connections, something in me finally snapped. I realized every decision they had made wasn't for me. It was for their pride, their image, their need to parade me around like a trophy. And I was tired of being polished metal on their shelf. Still, fear clung to me. Because defying them wasn't just about disappointing parents. It meant cutting myself off from everything. Financial support, family gatherings, even the illusion of love I'd clung to. Could I survive without them? The question echoed in my head as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. By morning, the answer wasn't clear. But one thing was, if I walked into that interview on my own, I wouldn't just be chasing a program. I'd be declaring war. Before we move on, take a second to hit subscribe and drop a comment. I'd love to hear what you think so far. I still remember the air that night. It was heavy, sticky, and suffocating, as if even the walls of my parents' house were holding their breath, waiting for the explosion. The dining room table was set like it was Thanksgiving. Polished cutlery, crystal glasses, candles flickering low. But it wasn't a holiday. It was a setup. I didn't know that yet, though. When I walked in, I thought it was just a family dinner. But the way my mother's eyes scanned me, up and down, like she was checking to see if I was presentable enough, already told me something was off. My father sat stiff, his jaw tight, not speaking a word. Then I saw the guest. A man I had never met before. Mid-30s, slick suit, that kind of empty smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "This is Marcus," my mother said, her tone rehearsed. "He comes from a respectable family. Runs his own firm." Froze. My fork slipped from my hand, clattering against the plate. "What?" I asked, already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. My father finally spoke, his voice booming, commanding the room. "He's here because we're announcing your engagement tonight. This is the man you'll marry." For a second I thought I misheard. My engagement. To a stranger. My stomach dropped so fast I thought I might faint. "I'm not marrying him," I said, my voice cracking but firm. My mother's face tightened, her lips thinning into that line I'd known since childhood. It was the look that meant she would not tolerate disobedience. "You don't know what's good for you." "We do. This is about securing your future, and ours." Marcus laughed awkwardly, as though he'd expected resistance but not outright refusal. "I'm sure we can get to know each other," he said smoothly, reaching for my hand across the table. I snatched it away. My whole body burned with humiliation. "This isn't about me, is it?" I whispered, though the room was so silent it carried like a scream. "This is about your pride. About showing the world, you've raised a daughter who can marry into money and status." My father slammed his fist on the table, rattling the glasses. "Enough. You will not embarrass us in front of our guest." I could feel my throat closing. My pulse pounded in my ears. "Embarrass you? You've embarrassed me. You're trading my life like it's some bargaining chip." I stood, chair scraping against the hardwood. But before I could leave, my mother delivered the final blow. "If you walk out that door," she said coldly, "you are no longer our daughter." The words sliced deeper than any blade. For a moment, I almost believed she wouldn't mean it, that once the anger passed, they'd call me back, apologize, tell me it was all some misunderstanding. But when I looked in her eyes, there was nothing but steel. She meant every word. Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. "I guess I was never your daughter then," I said, my voice shaking but loud enough to echo. And I left. I didn't look back. But as the door shut behind me, the sound of it felt final, like a coffin lid sealing shut. That night, in the darkness of my tiny apartment, I curled into myself and sobbed until there were no tears left. My chest ached, my head throbbed, and every part of me felt hollow. I had no parents anymore, no safety net, no family. And yet, deep in the pit of despair, something stirred. Not strength, not yet, but anger. A seed of defiance. A voice that whispered, "They think they own you, but they don't. And one day you'll prove it." That thought, small, fragile but burning, was the only thing that kept me breathing through the night. I'd lost everything, but maybe, just maybe, I could build something new. Something that was mine. The betrayal was complete. And now the war had begun. Before we go any further, click subscribe and let me know in the comments. What would you have done in my shoes? The morning after they disowned me, I woke up in my apartment with swollen eyes and a hollow chest. The silence was suffocating, but worse than that was the memory. Their voices echoed in my head. "You are no longer our daughter." It would have been easy to collapse into despair, to accept that I'd been cut loose and drift quietly into the shadows of their world. That's what they expected. They wanted me to crumble without their approval, to come crawling back, begging forgiveness, agreeing to whatever future they chose for me. But as I sat in that dim apartment, staring at the ceiling, I realized something sharp and cold. I would never crawl back. Not for them. Not for anyone. If they wanted pride, then I would destroy the very image they had spent their lives constructing. And I would do it in a way they could never recover from. At first, though, I had nothing but rage and a tiny paycheck from my dead-end job. The walls of my apartment were thin, the radiator barely worked, and the fridge was half empty. Some nights I cried myself to sleep, but other nights I stayed awake, whispering to myself like a promise. You're going to take your life back. You're going to make them choke on their pride. I started small. I took extra shifts. I learned how to save ruthlessly, cutting out every luxury I couldn't afford. I turned my pain into fuel, my humiliation into drive. Every time I wanted to quit, I remembered their faces at that table. How smug, how certain they were that they had control over me. And I kept going. Then came the books. Late at night, I sat cross-legged on the floor with stacks from the library. Finance, entrepreneurship, psychology, stories of people who had been crushed and rebuilt themselves. I devoured them like oxygen. For the first time in my life, I wasn't learning for their approval. I was learning for me. Still, revenge was only a vague flame flickering in the back of my mind. I knew I wanted justice, but not how to deliver it. Until one night something clicked. I was at a networking event for young professionals. Cheap wine, plastic name tags, and two bright smiles. I almost didn't go, but a coworker pushed me into it. That's when I overheard a conversation between two executives. They were laughing about people my age, how most of them have no backbone, no vision. And suddenly I saw it. My parents had always wanted me to be their puppet, a trophy for their pride. But what if I became the opposite? Something they couldn't control, something greater than they ever imagined. What if my life became the one thing they could never claim as theirs? That's when I decided. My revenge wouldn't just be personal. It would be public. I would rise so far above the box they tried to trap me in that the world itself would see their failure. Their empire of pride would collapse, and everyone would know the truth. They hadn't raised a dutiful daughter. They had raised a rebel who left them behind. The planning began in earnest. I mapped out goals, short-term, long-term. A better job than a business. Skills I would master. Connections I would make. I started freelancing at night, using every skill I had. Writing, design, consulting, anything to pull in extra cash. I lived on ramen and black coffee. My fingers sore from typing until dawn. I wasn't just working. I was sharpening myself into a weapon. But still there were doubts. Some nights the loneliness crushed me. I pick up my phone, stare at their number, and almost call. Almost beg. Then I remembered my mother's eyes. Cold, unyielding. I remembered my father's fist slamming the table. And I hung up before dialing. I wasn't going back. Months passed, then a year. Slowly, painfully, my efforts began to bear fruit. I secured a promotion at work. My freelance clients grew. I saved enough to move into a slightly bigger apartment. But more than money, I was building something far more dangerous: independence. And with independence came a plan. If my parents lived for appearances, then appearances would be their downfall. I would craft my own image, brick by brick, until it towered over theirs. I would succeed so publicly, so undeniably, that every time they heard my name, it would taste like ash in their mouths. I started documenting my journey quietly online, not under my full name, but enough that word would eventually spread. Career advice, small victories, reflections about breaking free from toxic expectations. To my shock, people listened. My following grew. Strangers wrote to me, saying my words gave them courage to stand up to their own families. The irony was almost poetic. My parents had tried to silence me, but by cutting me off, they'd given me a voice louder than they could ever control. And then, the opportunity I'd been waiting for arrived. An industry conference. Big, televised, the kind my parents watched religiously. One of my clients, impressed with my work, offered me a speaking slot. The topic: building a life on your own terms. It was perfect. Too perfect. I could already imagine them, sitting in their pristine living room, surrounded by neighbors and friends, watching the broadcast. waiting for some polished expert to appear on screen, only to see me, the daughter they disowned, the daughter they called ungrateful, the daughter who didn't just survive without them, she thrived. The plan was no longer just survival. It was war. And soon the world would see who really won. The day of the conference, I stood backstage in a tailored suit I'd bought secondhand but had altered to perfection. My palms were clammy, but my heart was steady. This wasn't fear. This was power. The stage manager whispered, "You're up next." I glanced at the massive screen projecting the event live to millions. Cameras were rolling. The audience was a mix of corporate leaders, professionals, and, more importantly, the kind of people my parents surrounded themselves with. Their world was watching. And soon they'd see what became of the daughter they tried to erase. When I walked out, the spotlight was blinding, the applause polite but expectant. I gripped the podium, breathed once, and began. My name is Claire. I am 28 years old. And for most of my life, I lived under someone else's script, someone else's expectations. The room hushed instantly. I told my story, not in bitterness but with raw truth, about how I was groomed to be the perfect child for their pride, how I was forced into choices that weren't mine, how, when I finally dared to want something different, I was cast aside. Every word was measured, deliberate, piercing. I was told I would never make it on my own, that without their approval I was nothing, that if I didn't play my role, I would fade into obscurity. But here I am, thriving, free, and happier without them than I ever was under their control. A ripple ran through the audience. I could see heads nodding, eyes widening, hands tightening around pens and phones as if scribbling down the courage they'd just witnessed. I wasn't just giving a speech. I was detonating a bomb. Then I went further. Because revenge without precision is just noise. I spoke directly to the children of pride-obsessed parents. To those who had been told they weren't enough unless they followed a path carved by someone else's ego. You are not their trophy. You are not their property. You are not an extension of their vanity. You are your own person. And the moment you realize that, their power dissolves. The applause began, not polite but fierce, erupting like a storm. I smiled coldly, imagining my parents at home, staring at the screen in horror as their neighbors turned to them, whispering, calculating. Because everyone knew exactly who I was talking about. And everyone would know that the perfect image they paraded for decades was nothing but a prison. The aftermath was swift. Within days, clips of my speech went viral. Articles quoted my lines. People tagged me in posts about breaking cycles and reclaiming freedom. Invitations flooded my inbox. Interviews, collaborations, even book deals. Meanwhile, my parents' silence was deafening. Their pride, once their weapon, became their undoing. They couldn't publicly admit I was their daughter without acknowledging the truth of what I said. And they couldn't deny it, either, because the world had already pieced it together. Their empire of appearances cracked. At social events, their friends asked careful questions. Whispers followed them. The family name they'd guarded so viciously was now synonymous with control, cruelty, and hypocrisy. They were exposed, and there was nothing they could do to cage me again. But the true revenge wasn't just in their humiliation. It was in the life I built beyond them. I moved into a new home, filled it with laughter and warmth. I surrounded myself with people who loved me for who I was, not for the image I upheld. I carved out a career that was mine. Messy, imperfect, but free. And every success, every smile, every breath of peace was another nail in the coffin of their pride. The final time I ever heard from them was through a terse letter, unsigned but unmistakable in tone. It read simply, "You've embarrassed us. Congratulations. We hope you're proud." I laughed when I read it, not with joy but with the bitter satisfaction of victory. 'Cause they were right. I was proud. Not of embarrassing them, though that was a satisfying bonus. But of surviving them. Of proving that their control was never my destiny. And that I could live a life of happiness, loudly, without them. So that was my story. I was the daughter my parents tried to script into their perfect showpiece, an accessory to their pride. When I refused, they erased me. But what they didn't know was that cutting me off was the sharpest weapon I could ever wield. Because it forced me to become my own person. Stronger, sharper, and untouchable. They lost the image they worshipped. And I found the life they swore I'd never have. No more chains, no more scripts. No more walking on eggshells for their reputation. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't a confrontation. It's living so freely, so loudly, that those who tried to bury you are forced to watch from the shadows. And that's exactly what I did. Cold, final, irreversible. This was my story of betrayal, of breaking free, and of building happiness without them.